The Varath ship came in sideways. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the hull damage, not the fact that it was broadcasting a modified emergency code I had never seen before, but the angle. It came through the outer approach, lane crabbing 15 degrees off its longitudinal axis, like the pilot was compensating for something, and not doing it well. We had 3 minutes of warning before it dropped out of transit entirely, and drifted into Cathara's gravity well on fumes. The dock traffic controller had the presence of mind to clear Bay 9 and get the emergency clamps warm. I was standing at my workbench when the intercom crackled. Mystery, Bay 9, bring the drive diagnostic rig. I gathered the rig and went. I want to be clear about something. I am not military. I hold a Class IV Combined System certification, and I have been posted to Relay Station, Cathara, for 6 years because I am good at fixing things that should not be fixable. That is my job. I do not carry a weapon. I do not make policy. When they tell me to go to a bay and fix a ship, I go to the bay and I fix the ship. The politics of who the ship belongs to and what the station commander decided to allow through the outer perimeter, and why, that is not my assignment. I leave it to people who are paid to care about it. The Varath ship was called the Sorek Kaval, which I later learned, translated roughly as Blooded Spear. It sat in Bay 9 with its landing struts deployed at uneven angles, because 2 of the hydraulic lines had ruptured. The hull along the port midships was scored in 3 long parallel lines that looked like they had been made by something enormous. The main drive housing was cracked along the secondary weld seam, which meant the coil inside was either shattered or had vibrated loose from its mount, and either way the ship was not going anywhere until someone replaced it or resecured it. There were 7 Varath standing in the bay when I arrived, and 6 of them were in the kind of condition that tells you a fight happened recently and badly. One had his arm wrapped with field dressings. Another was sitting against the landing strut with her head forward, and what looked like a concussive stare. The 7th stood apart from the others, and he was the one who had not been touched. I knew a little about the Varath from the station's cultural briefing files, which I had read once 3 years ago, and retained approximately a third of. They were a hereditary warrior culture. Status was earned through direct combat and kept through lineage. Their leadership structure was built around a concept I cannot properly translate. Briefing called it acknowledged precedence, meaning the person with the most demonstrated kills from the highest lineages outranked everyone else in the room, and that precedence was not symbolic. It was functional. It determined who spoke, who ate first, who made decisions. The standing one was obviously that person. He was watching me. I set down the diagnostic rig, popped the catches on the housing, tooed, and started pulling out the sensor leads. He did not say anything. His people did not say anything. I worked. The drive coil was loose. The primary retention bracket had sheared at the port side mounting point, probably during whatever caused those hull scores. And the coil had been rattling against the housing wall for however long they had been in transit. It had not shattered, which was lucky for all of us, because a shattered drive coil in an enclosed bay is something you do not want to be present for. Could remount it. I would need to fabricate a replacement bracket from the station's material stock, which would take about 2 hours, and then the reseat and calibration would take another hour on top of that. I told this to the translation unit clipped to my collar. It rendered my words into Varath standard. No one responded. I got up and went to the fabrication station at the back of the bay. I pulled the bracket specs from the ship's external port. They gave me access without comment, which I noted and filed away as something probably significant, and I ran the material order. While the fabricator ran, I came back and started working on the secondary problem, which was the hydraulic lines on the landing struts. Those I could fix with what I had in the rig. At some point during the second hour, I became aware that the standing Varath had moved closer. I did not look up. You learn in this job not to perform. If you look up every time something moves in your peripheral vision, you signal that you are tracking it, and tracking it means it affects you. And if it affects you, then someone has leverage. I kept my hands in the hydraulic junction and kept working. But I had already seen what I needed to see before he moved. It was on his belt, on the left side where a human might wear a utility pouch, a disc, roughly the size of my thumb, hammered from what looked like a dark bronze-brown metal. Flat, not perfectly round. The kind of thing you make by hand rather than by machine. The rim had been filed, not smoothed, filed deliberately in a series of short, distinct notches. I had counted them when I first walked in, deciding to, the way you count anything you notice. 17 notches, each one clean, each one the same depth, evenly spaced around about 3/4 of the disk's circumference. Stopping, as far as I could tell, because there was still room, I did not ask about it. The bracket finished fabricating at the 3-hour mark. I carried it to the drive housing, laid out the tools I needed in the order I would need them, and started the remount sequence. Precise work. The coil has to seat within 0.2 of a millimeter tolerance, or the calibration run will keep throwing errors. And if you let it throw errors, and just clear them manually, the coil will vibrate loose again the next time the ship hits a transit boundary. So I did it slowly, I did it correctly. I did not rush because someone was watching. The reseat took 40 minutes. The calibration took another 35. When the diagnostic panel came back clean, I ran it a second time, on general principle, still clean. I closed the housing, secured the catches, and ran the full systems check from the external port. The ship was functional. I stood up and stretched my back, because I had been crouching for most of that last hour, and I looked at the Varath Heir. I had decided that is what he was, an heir candidate of some kind, though I had no specific reason beyond the way the other 6 watched him, and the way he held himself. And I told the translation unit that the primary drive was recalibrated and secure. The secondary hydraulic lines on landing struts 2 and 4 were replaced, and the ship was cleared for transit when they were ready. He looked at me for a long moment. The translation unit rendered his response. It was 2 words in Varath Standard. The unit gave me, "It holds," that was all. They left in less than 20 minutes. The bay cleared. I heard the drive spin up through the deck plating. Smooth, no rattle, the way it should sound. And then the hum-hum faded as they moved out through the outer lane, and Bay 9 was just an empty bay again, with a few hydraulic fluid stains on the deck. I started gathering my tools back into the rig. That is when I saw it. It was sitting on the corner of the fabrication station, in the space where I had spread out my bracket tools before I carried them to the drive housing. He must have set it there while I was finishing the calibration, while my back was turned, and my hands were occupied with something that required my attention. A flat bronze-brown disc, roughly thumb-sized, not quite round. 17 notches filed into the rim. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. The metal was warm, which surprised me. It had been sitting on a cold station surface, but it was warm, and I did not have a good explanation for that, so I stopped looking for one. The notches were smooth under my fingertip, each one deliberate, each one I understood now, representing something I had no capacity to fully appreciate. I do not know what it cost him to leave it there. I do not know if his lineage records now show a transaction he cannot explain to his court, or if there is a Varath category for this kind of acknowledgement, or if he invented one in the space between my calibration check and their departure. I do not know if I will ever see the Sorek Caval again, or whether the hull scores will be explained to someone, whether 17 becomes 18 or 19 or more, filed into the rim of a new disk, because they are still alive to add them. I set the disk on my workbench. It sat there under the bay lights, small and specific and heavier than it looked. I went to write up the repair log.